Rome, 1550. A starving boy sleeps beneath the shadow of St. Peter's Basilica. He wakes to find a pair of silk shoes inches from his face. A powerful man towers over him, smiling, offering warm bread. The boy thinks he's been saved. But this is no rescue. It's a trap set by a pope whose desires would ignite one of the darkest scandals in church history. And the boy? He will rise to wear the crimson robes of a cardinal, while living as the pope's most dangerous secret. Section 1. Hunger and Silk Shoes. Rain dripped steadily from the cracked stone eaves, pooling in the uneven cobblestones beneath you. The cold gnawed at your bones, sharp and relentless. You were 14, though your body felt older, worn down by hunger and exhaustion. You had fallen asleep against the crumbling wall of a wine merchant's warehouse, wrapped in a filthy scrap of blanket you'd stolen from a dead man weeks ago. Sleep on the streets of Rome was never deep. Too many thieves, too many predators, but hunger had dragged you under like a riptide. Something soft brushed your cheek. Your eyes fluttered open, groggy and confused, and the first thing you saw were shoes. Not just any shoes, silk slippers embroidered with threads of gold, their soles clean despite the mud-filled streets. Your breath caught. You scrambled backward, heart pounding, but a gloved hand lifted gently, as though to calm a frightened animal. "Peace, ragazzo," the man said softly, his voice smooth and cultured. "You needn't be afraid." You looked up at him. His robes were a deep, luxurious crimson, trimmed with pearls. Rings heavy with jewels glittered on his fingers, each one worth more than you could imagine. His face was pale and aristocratic, lined with age but carefully maintained. The smell hit you next, warm bread. Fresh. Your stomach cramped violently, making you dizzy. The man held out a small loaf wrapped in clean cloth. Steam rose from it like incense from a church altar. "Eat," he urged. His tone was fatherly, almost tender. You didn't ask why. You didn't dare. You snatched the bread and devoured it, burning your mouth but unable to slow down. Tears stung your eyes from the sheer relief of having food in your belly. The man watched you with a strange intensity, his lips curling into the faintest smile. "My name," he said at last, "is Cardinal Vitelli." You froze mid-bite. Even a street rat like you knew that name. Cardinal Vitelli was one of the most powerful men in Rome, rumored to be favored in the upcoming papal conclave. "You've been wandering these streets too long," he continued smoothly. "God does not abandon his children. Perhaps he guided me to you tonight. You wanted to believe him. You wanted to believe anyone cared enough to save you. But his eyes were wrong. They gleamed with something beneath the gentleness, something that made your skin crawl. You'd lived on the streets long enough to recognize danger. Predators came in many forms, some wore daggers, others wore holy robes. Still, you were so desperately hungry for kindness that you ignored the unease twisting in your gut. You told yourself that a man of God couldn't mean harm. You were wrong. Section 2. The bargain you didn't see. Cardinal Vitelli didn't tell you that he'd been watching you for weeks. His servants, discreet men dressed like ordinary beggars, had followed you through alleys and markets, noting where you slept, which bakeries you stole from, and which merchants sometimes tossed you scraps. They recorded how many days you went without food, which nights you cried silently into your filthy blanket, how often you fought other street children for rotten vegetables. They knew your real name, Matteo Ricci. They knew the names of your parents, who had died in a plague 2 winters past, leaving you utterly alone. Vitelli needed someone like you. Pope Clement VII had died unexpectedly, and the throne of St. Peter was empty. Rome was now a cauldron of ambition and intrigue. Cardinals from across Europe had gathered to elect the next leader of Christendom, each scheming for advantage. Vitelli's rivals whispered about his unholy appetites. Too many rumors swirled through the Vatican corridors. To become pope, he needed a diversion, a symbol of purity and innocence he could present to the world, masking the darkness within. You were perfect, young enough to mold, beautiful enough to display, and utterly alone. If you vanished, no one would ask questions. He crouched beside you, lowering himself to your level, and brushed a strand of greasy hair from your forehead. His gloved touch made you flinch. "Matteo," he said softly, as though savoring the name. "Would you like to serve God? To have food, warmth, safety? To never fear the cold streets again?" Your mouth opened, but no words came out. You could only nod, trembling. "Good," he murmured, his smile widening. "Then come with me." Behind him, two servants appeared as if conjured from the mist. They lifted you gently but firmly, supporting you as your weakened legs stumbled. As they led you toward a waiting carriage, you glanced back at the alley where you had spent so many nights. The crumbling walls, the stench of rot, the constant fear, they would all be gone now. You didn't know that you were leaving behind more than just hunger. You were leaving freedom itself. Section 3, Conclave of Shadows. The Vatican was a labyrinth of marble corridors and echoing halls. You had never imagined such splendor: gold-leaf ceilings, frescoes painted by masters, floors so polished they reflected torchlight like mirrors. Vitelli's servants guided you through hidden passages to avoid prying eyes. They brought you to a small, secluded chamber with a soft bed and warm blankets. For the first time in years, you slept without fear of being kicked awake or robbed. Meanwhile, beyond those walls, chaos reigned. The conclave to elect the new pope had begun. 65 cardinals were locked inside the Sistine Chapel, forbidden to leave until a decision was reached. Days turned into weeks. Arguments grew heated. Bribes changed hands beneath altars. Some cardinals collapsed from the suffocating heat, others from sheer exhaustion. Vitelli moved through this storm like a serpent through tall grass, whispering promises into ears, offering favors, spreading lies about his rivals. While others argued about theology, Vitelli plotted something simpler: survival. His private indulgences could ruin him if exposed. You were his insurance, his beautiful distraction. On the 63rd day, white smoke finally rose from the chapel chimney. Bells rang across Rome. Crowds cheered, tossing flowers into the air. Cardinal Vitelli emerged onto the balcony, now Pope Urban IX. The city roared in jubilation, never suspecting that beneath his holy robes beat the heart of a predator. And somewhere deep within the Vatican, you slept peacefully, unaware that your life had just been bound to his forever. Section 4, Cleansing the Street Rat. You awoke to the soft murmur of voices and the faint scent of rosewater. Blinking in confusion, you found yourself lying in a bed so soft it felt like clouds. Sunlight streamed through a high, arched window, illuminating frescoes of angels and saints on the ceiling. For a dizzying moment, you thought you'd died and ascended to heaven. Then you saw the servants. 2 men and a woman stood beside the bed, their expressions carefully neutral. They wore white tunics and carried bundles of linen. A tall, thin man stepped forward and spoke with clipped precision. "His Holiness has commanded that you be made presentable." Before you could ask what that meant, they seized you gently but firmly and stripped away your filthy rags. You yelped and tried to cover yourself, but the woman only said, "There is no shame in cleanliness." They carried you to a large marble basin filled with steaming water. Scented oils floated on the surface, gleaming like molten gold. The first touch of heat against your skin was bliss, but it didn't last. The servants scrubbed you with rough cloths until your skin burned. They scraped the dirt from under your nails, combed the lice from your hair, and examined every inch of you with clinical detachment. They made notes on a parchment scroll while you trembled with humiliation. "Too thin," the tall man muttered. "Scars on the back, likely from street fights. His face, however, yes, quite symmetrical. With proper grooming, he will please His Holiness." The words meant little to you then, but a sick feeling began to churn in your stomach. When the bath was over, they dressed you in a plain linen robe and led you to a mirror. You gasped. The boy reflected there was unrecognizable. Your hair, once a filthy tangle, had been cut and styled. Your skin glowed from the oils they had rubbed into it. You looked almost noble. Almost holy. "His Holiness will see you now," the tall man said. Your heart pounded as they escorted you through silent corridors to a chamber guarded by men in scarlet uniforms. The doors opened slowly, revealing Pope Urban IX seated on a throne of carved ivory. He smiled at you, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, Matteo," he said warmly, beckoning you forward. "Look at you! No longer a street rat. You are reborn." You knelt instinctively, as you'd seen others do before priests. Urban rose and approached, placing a hand on your shoulder. The weight of it felt like chains. "From this day forth," he said softly, "you will serve me, and through me serve God. You will learn to read, to write, to speak with grace. You will be my cherished son in spirit." Your chest swelled with conflicting emotions, pride, confusion, fear. But beneath his holy words lurked something darker, something you couldn't yet name. Section 5. Lessons in Obedience. The next morning your education began. Father Domenico, a stern priest with sharp eyes, was assigned as your tutor. He wasted no time. "You are no longer a beggar," he told you coldly. "You are in the service of the Holy Father. Your every word, every movement, must reflect His glory." The days fell into a rigid routine. At dawn, you were drilled in Latin, forced to repeat prayers and scripture until your throat ached. Mistakes were punished with sharp strikes to the palms of your hands. In the afternoons, you learned courtly manners, how to bow, how to speak to nobility, how to move gracefully across a room. Servants corrected the tilt of your head, the position of your fingers, even the way you breathed. At night, you practiced walking in the ornate clothes they provided, garments of silk and velvet that felt like costumes on your thin frame. Again, Father Domenico would snap whenever you faltered. "Do you wish to shame His Holiness?" Each evening, Pope Urban would visit you. His demeanor was warm, almost fatherly, and you clung to that kindness like a lifeline. He praised your progress, gave you small gifts, a gold crucifix, a book of psalms, a silver ring. "You are special, Matteo," he would whisper. "God has chosen you for a purpose beyond your imagining." At first, his touch was innocent, a pat on the head, a hand on your shoulder. But gradually, subtly it changed. His fingers lingered longer. His hand would rest on your knee, then slide slightly higher. When you flinched, he would chuckle softly. "Do not be afraid, my son," he would say. "This is how Holy Fathers show their love." The first time he kissed your forehead, you told yourself it was harmless. The second time, when his lips brushed the corner of your mouth, you began to understand that something was terribly wrong. But by then you were trapped. Section 6. The Other Boys. Not all the palace's inhabitants were strangers. One evening, as you slipped from the chapel after prayers, a boy about 16 blocked your path. His hair was dark and curly, his eyes hollow. "You're new," he said flatly. You nodded, unsure what to say. "My name is Luca," he continued. "I've been here 3 years." Something in his tone made you uneasy. Luca glanced around to ensure they were alone, then leaned closer. His whisper was barely audible. "Be careful with him. The Holy Father, he gives, but he also takes." "What do you mean?" you asked, heart pounding. But Luca only shook his head. "You'll see." In the following weeks, you noticed other boys in the palace, some serving as choir singers, others as attendants. They avoided certain corridors, spoke in hushed voices, and flinched when particular names were mentioned. You realized, with growing dread, that they were just like you. One night, Luca smuggled you into a disused wine cellar. By torchlight, he rolled up his sleeve to reveal a network of scars across his forearm, thin, deliberate cuts forming twisted symbols. "He calls them blessings," Luca whispered bitterly. "But they are marks of ownership. He brands us, Matteo. Body and soul." Your stomach turned. "You have to get out," Luca urged. "Before his voice broke. "Before you become like me." But escape was impossible. Guards watched your every move. Even the servants reported back to the Pope. And deep down, you feared Luca was right. Section 7. Chains and Velvet. The days that followed Luca's warning felt different. You began to notice things you hadn't seen before: the locked doors in certain hallways, the way servants avoided your eyes, the hushed silences that fell whenever the Pope's name was mentioned. At first, you clung to the idea that Luca was exaggerating, that his scars were relics of some other life. But the truth revealed itself piece by piece, like candlelight slowly exposing the corners of a darkened room. Urban Ajax's nightly visits grew longer. He would sit beside you on the ornate bed, speaking softly of faith and duty. His words were honeyed, but beneath them lurked something sinister. His hands, once fatherly, now wandered with boldness. One evening, he pressed a gold crucifix into your palm. "You are my miracle, Matteo," he murmured. "The streets tried to destroy you, but God sent you to me. Your obedience will save countless souls." You wanted to pull away, to scream, but fear held you still. The Pope's face darkened when you hesitated. "Do you remember where I found you?" he hissed, his voice suddenly sharp. "Filthy, starving, unwanted. I saved you. Without me, you are nothing." Tears burned your eyes as you nodded, choking out, "Yes, Your Holiness." His expression softened instantly. "Good boy," he whispered, kissing your hair. "Never forget who you belong to." That night, as you lay trembling, you understood the full weight of Luca's words. You weren't being elevated, you were being claimed. The silk robes, the lessons, the gifts, they were chains, carefully disguised. Section 8. A Room of Secrets. Weeks passed, and with them came a ritual you dreaded. Late at night, when the palace was silent, the guards would escort you to a private chamber deep within the papal apartments. Its walls were lined with tapestries of biblical scenes, but beneath the holy imagery lay a sense of suffocating darkness. Locks clinked into place behind you. Urban IX was always waiting, dressed in simple robes rather than his ceremonial finery. His smile was warm, his tone gentle, but the air around him felt heavy, oppressive. Here, he was not the Pope. Here, he was something else entirely. He would speak to you of sacred intimacy, claiming that the bond between spiritual father and son was unlike any other. His hands would guide you, his voice soothing, his words laced with scripture twisted to suit his desires. Each time, you left the room feeling less like a person and more like an object, a vessel for his power, his hungers, his delusions. The worst part was the silence that followed. No one spoke of what happened there, but everyone knew. The guards avoided your gaze. The servants bowed lower than usual. Even Luca would not meet your eyes. One night, as you stumbled back to your chambers, Luca caught your arm. "Matteo," he said urgently, "listen to me. That room, it breaks people. You must find a way to survive, even if it means pretending." "Pretending what?" you whispered, terrified. "That you want it. That you believe him. It's the only way to keep him from destroying you completely." You wanted to protest, to scream that you weren't like the others. But deep down, you knew Luca was right. From that night forward, you became an actor in a play you despised. You smiled when Urban demanded it, murmured gratitude when he praised you, swallowed your revulsion when he touched you. On the outside, you appeared the perfect pupil. Inside, you were crumbling. Section 9. A Cardinal in Crimson. The first rumors began in whispers. Foreign diplomats spoke of a mysterious youth who had captured the Pope's favor. Bishops speculated about your rapid rise, your sudden presence at papal ceremonies. But when Urban IX made his announcement, even his closest allies were stunned. On a warm spring morning, standing beneath the grand dome of St. Peter's Basilica, he declared his intention to elevate you to the rank of cardinal. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A street boy, barely 15, would become a prince of the Church, a position of immense spiritual and political power. The Vatican released a carefully crafted story. You were a child of miraculous virtue, blessed with divine visions, chosen by God Himself to guide the faithful. Paintings depicted you with a halo of light, your face serene and pure. But behind closed doors, outrage boiled. Kings and emperors sent furious letters. Even some cardinals threatened open revolt. Urban IX ignored them all. The ceremony took place in the Sistine Chapel, beneath Michelangelo's painted ceiling. You knelt before the Pope as he placed the scarlet biretta upon your head. "Rise, Cardinal Matteo," he intoned, his voice echoing through the chamber. The crowd applauded, but you could feel their disgust beneath the polite clapping. Some cardinals refused to look at you. Others touched your hands with barely concealed revulsion. The red robes weighed heavily on your shoulders. Cardinals wore crimson to signify their willingness to shed blood for the faith. For you, the color meant something different, a mark of ownership, a declaration to the world that you were Urban's creation, his possession. As the choir sang, you caught Luca's gaze across the room. His eyes were filled with pity and warning. This wasn't a promotion. It was a gilded cage. Section 10. Days of Masks, Nights of Chains. By day, you performed your role flawlessly. You attended councils where decisions shaping the fate of nations were made. You met with ambassadors, blessed pilgrims, and delivered speeches written for you by others. The crowd saw a young, radiant cardinal, living proof of divine favor. But at night the mask slipped. Urban summoned you to his private chambers more frequently, his demands escalating. He grew reckless, sometimes inviting select guests to witness his sacred ceremonies. Wealthy merchants, corrupt bishops, and even other cardinals watched with hungry eyes as you were paraded before them like a trophy. Luca's words echoed in your mind, "Pretend, or he will destroy you completely." So you pretended. You smiled through the tears, obeyed through the terror, endured through the agony. The dual life was unbearable. Each morning, as the sun rose over Rome, you dressed in crimson and gold, playing the holy cardinal. Each night you returned to the shadows, stripped of dignity and humanity. Your reflection became a stranger. The boy who had once begged for bread was gone, replaced by a hollow vessel wearing a mask of sanctity. One evening, Luca slipped a scrap of parchment into your hand. Scrawled upon it were 5 words. "There is a way out." You stared at the message long into the night, torn between fear and desperate hope. Section 11. The Fall of the Holy Father. The scrap of parchment burned in your pocket like a live coal. There is a way out. For days you could think of nothing else. Luca avoided you in public, but when the guards' backs were turned, he whispered fragments of a plan. "The kings are furious," he told you one night, his voice trembling. "Urban's obsession with you has pushed them too far. They're already plotting his downfall. If we move carefully, we can disappear in the chaos." "But the guards," you hissed. "The palace is a prison." Luca's eyes gleamed with desperation. "Not for long. There are factions inside the church that want him gone. They will help us, if you play your part." Your heart pounded as you realized what he meant. To survive, you would have to betray the man who had destroyed you. Over the next week, you played your role perfectly. You smiled at Urban, obeyed his every whim, and endured his touch without flinching. The deception was agony, but it bought you time. Meanwhile, rumors swirled like storm clouds over Rome. Foreign ambassadors demanded answers. Cardinals whispered in shadowed corridors. Even the common people began to question the holiness of a pope who lavished such attention on a single boy. Then, one fateful morning, everything shattered. Urban collapsed during Mass, clutching his chest. Panic erupted as attendants rushed to his side. Poison was suspected, though never proven. For 6 days he lingered between life and death. He called for you constantly, his once mighty voice reduced to a hoarse whisper. "Matteo," he rasped, clutching your hand with surprising strength. "Forgive me. You are my salvation." You wanted to scream that he had damned you instead, but you only bowed your head and whispered, "I forgive you, Holy Father." On the 7th day, Pope Urban IX died. The Vatican erupted into chaos. Rival cardinals scrambled for power. Soldiers filled the streets to prevent riots. In the midst of this turmoil, Luca acted. "Now!" he hissed, grabbing your arm. He led you through hidden passages you hadn't known existed, passages only the servants and older boys understood. At dawn, you emerged outside the city walls, the cold air biting your skin. For the first time in years, there were no guards, no locked doors, no crimson robes. You were free, but not whole. Luca gripped your shoulders. "We can go anywhere now," he said urgently. "Florence, Venice, even France. We can build new lives." You stared at him, then at the distant silhouette of St. Peter's Basilica. The thought of running filled you with longing and terror. You could escape, yes, but the world would never know what had been done to you, to Luca, to the countless others who had vanished into the Vatican's shadows. "No," you said softly, surprising even yourself. "The truth must be told." Years later, long after you had fled Rome and taken a new name, stories began to spread. Whispered rumors of a corrupt pope, of boys stolen from the streets, of a cardinal who had once been a beggar. The church buried most of it, rewriting history as it always did. But some fragments survived: letters, portraits, songs sung by drunkards in taverns. As for you, Matteo Ricci ceased to exist. The world believed you had died in obscurity, a forgotten pawn in a game of power. But sometimes, late at night, you would dream of crimson robes and locked doors. You would hear Urban's voice whispering promises of salvation, and you would wake with the taste of bread and ashes in your mouth. You had escaped the Vatican's walls, but the scarlet cage was forever etched into your soul. And somewhere in Rome, another hungry child stared at a loaf of warm bread, unaware that salvation and damnation often wore the same face.